All right, well, welcome everyone. Tonight we are excited to present Conserving Northwest Connecticut today and tomorrow. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Amy Billingmore-Patterson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Land Conservation Council, or CLCC, which is the umbrella organization for Connecticut's land conservation community and Connecticut's only statewide service organization for our 125 or so land trusts. We are delighted to support this exciting project, which was undertaken by the Conway School for Save the Sound and the Northwest Connecticut Land Conservancy. And joining me tonight are my colleagues Aaron Lefland from CLCC, Amanda Branson from the Northwest Connecticut Land Conservancy, Kathy Siepel from Save the Sound, Sarah Pellegrino from the Nature Conservancy Connecticut, and Julia Rogers from Housatonic Valley Association. I was so worried about missing somebody, I read their name twice. So I'm going to hold off and let them introduce themselves. But before we get started, I just wanted to provide you with some ground rules for tonight's webinar. First is please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. And also please turn off your screen, your video, until the end when we do open it up for questions. It's distracting for presenters, especially when there is a PowerPoint going on, when there is a lot of movement amongst the audience. So if you wouldn't mind turning off your video as well, we'd appreciate it. Please feel free to place your questions in the chat. We will do our best to get to all the questions at the very end. And also, if there's time, to allow you to just raise your hand and give your, ask your question in the moment. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Amanda Branson from the Northwest Connecticut Land Conservancy. And again, thanks everybody for coming.
Thanks, Amy. So I am Director of Operations and Finance for NCLC. NCLC is the regional land trust in Northwest Connecticut. We protect 13,000 acres in Litchfield and northern Fairfield counties. We're here tonight. Oops. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm going to have to stop my share and reshare just so that I can advance the slides. Just give me one moment. So we're here tonight to discuss the publication Conserving Northwest Connecticut. The report, as Amy said, was prepared by NCLC and Save the Sound with the Conway School, along with critical input and guidance from the Nature Conservancy, CLCC, and Housatonic Valley Associations Follow the Forest Initiative. The Conway School is a graduate program based in Northampton, Massachusetts. It's a program in sustainable landscape planning and design. The students that we worked with them early in 2023, and as is the life of students, they have moved on to other educational opportunities and into the beginning of their careers. So they weren't able to join us tonight, but I'm delighted that you'll get to hear from all of the organizations that helped to guide the report. I also wanted to thank the many land trusts, conservation organizations, and the 3 councils of government that engaged with the students while they were researching and drafting the report. Their input was incredibly important to help educate the students and to make sure that the students were capturing a variety of perspectives on the issues that they were writing about. The report sprung from an ongoing partnership between NCLC and Save the Sound. That partnership is ongoing, and it's largely centered on water companies' supply lands. The partnership also resulted in securing the permanent protection of 5,500 acres of water company lands, or also known as quasi-protected lands, in the northern part of our region. We'll come back to the concept of quasi-protected lands in a minute. And for those who are interested in learning more about that particular project, Kathy will drop a link into the chat so you can learn a bit more about the details on that. But tonight we intend to give an overview of the report, including describing why conserving land in Northwest Connecticut is important. Sometimes it's easy to gloss over that concept, but it can be really helpful to pause and go back and look at all of the different reasons that conservation organizations are engaged in the work that they do. We're also going to talk about the ecological, economic, and equity considerations and discuss the answers to these questions. I also wanted to note that we have sent hard copies of the report to land trusts in our region and elected officials at the municipal and state level. Copies of the report are now limited, but if you would like additional hard copies, you're welcome to reach out and let me know. We'll do our best to honor those requests. But I wanted to note that the report is available to view online, both on NCLC's website and Save the Sound's website. So before we discuss the report itself, I wanted to provide some additional background and context for where we started and about 30 by 30 in general. In 2021, NCLC published a report called The Pace and Scale of Conservation. That report is also available on our website. We worked with all of the land trusts you can see on the screen now, and the report endeavored to assess both the pace and the capacity for preserving additional land in our region. The key findings of the report are included here. This really captures several things. It demonstrates that the pace of conservation done by land trusts is increasing, which is fantastic news. You can see that in our look back period, land trusts averaged about 23 transactions per year, but if you look at just the past 5 years, the number of transactions has increased to 28. It also shows one of the reasons that Connecticut is a difficult place to do conservation work. The average transaction size here is 39 acres. And that's one of the reasons that doing conservation work in Connecticut is incredibly difficult. We have relatively small parcel sizes. We have very high land values, and Connecticut ranks near the bottom for conservation funding as compared to other states in New England and nationally. We can also use the Pace of Conservation report to make predictions about our region against state, federal, and global goals like 30 by 30. 30 by 30 is the goal that's really contemplated in the report. It's a global effort to protect 30% of the Earth's lands and waters by 2030, to protect biodiversity, to mitigate climate change, and to ensure equitable access to the outdoors for all people. At this point, over 90 countries have adopted the 30 by 30 initiative. It's always important to note that 30 by 30 is not necessarily the end. Should we achieve 30 by 30, that does not mean that we are done. We see it as an interim goal, and in our region, it is an achievable goal. This slide helps to describe within NCLC's service region, which again is Litchfield County and Northern Fairfield County, where we stand against a 30 by 30 goal upon the publication of the Pace and Scale of Conservation report. So as of the end of 2020 and early 2021, at that time, we were at just about 23% protected. This slide can be a little bit easier to be able to envision what that is like. So there would be just about 47,000 acres left to protect to achieve a 30 by 30 goal. So as I mentioned, quasi-protected lands are important to consider. We call these lands quasi-protected. They're lands that have some friction in the system to prevent their conversion into into other types of uses. So these include lands that have statutory limitations, like water supply and water company lands. So that's the majority of quasi-protected lands. We also include in this category lands that are owned by entities that are used primarily for outdoor recreation or conservation, but they're not owned by land trusts or legally protected. But when we include quasi-protected lands, the region is at almost 29% protected. So this is that same slide, but depicting that concept of the quasi-protected lands. And so the remaining acres to be protected would be 7,675 acres. And with the continuing tremendous work of land trusts in our region, I'm assured that the goal of reaching 30 by 30 is achievable. It might not be achievable in every community, but when we look at the region as a whole or the state as a whole, achieving 30 by 30 is within our grasp. And with that, I can turn it over to Julia Rogers to delve more deeply into the contents of the report itself.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. I'll have you go to the next slide for me. So hi, everyone. My name is Julia Rogers. I'm the Senior Land Protection Manager at the Housatonic Valley Association. And as I kick it off to dive into this section of the report, I really want to extend gratitude to NCLC and Save the Sound for bringing us all together to provide input and feedback on this, what's really a phenomenal report. So I'm going to tag team sort of my section a little bit with Sarah Pellegrino from the Nature Conservancy. But I was asked to really focus on this section that the students put together on why it's important to conserve land within Northwest Connecticut. And you can see the plethora of points that they put together on the slide there. And we'll dive into them in a few different ways. But what I think is really exciting and what all of us were sort of talking about as we were putting this webinar together is that bringing these different eyes of the students to this question of why it's important to conserve land in Northwest Connecticut really gives us additional ways of thinking about conservation and additional ways of talking about why conservation is important in our region. So I really encourage everyone to dive a little bit deeper into the report. There's the students really did an incredible job. So Amanda, you can go to the next slide. So the first point, I lost my slides. Excellent. Okay. So the first point I really wanted to focus in on was to talk about clean water. And this is where the students really started off with, but also working for the Housatonic Valley Association, which is a watershed organization, I thought it advantageous to start here. So the majority of Northwestern Connecticut lies within the Housatonic River watershed, which extends across 3 states, but a small portion of our of Northwest Connecticut also extends into the Connecticut River watershed. And of course, what's important to note is that both of these watersheds drain directly into the Long Island Sound and are part of the much larger Long Island Sound watershed. What's also important to think about, though, is not just the surface water that we have within our region, but the really critical drinking water supply. So the map on the right is a map that the students pulled together that shows the drinking water supply watersheds within Northwest Connecticut. And to me, this is partially where talking about conservation and clean water gets really interesting, because we're no longer just talking about residents or visitors to our region, but we're also talking about nearby communities. Many of the larger cities within Connecticut draw their water supply from within Northwest Connecticut. So the conservation of land within those regions is directly applicable to their quality of life and the drinking water that they use. So as I'm sure many folks in this Zoom room know, the amount of impervious surface within a watershed really dictates that water quality. So conserving lands and maintaining less impervious surface is really critical to maintaining that water quality, and a really critical reason to think about conservation from a clean water perspective. Amanda, you can move to the next slide. But we can also think about, right, the air that we breathe and how critical it is that we have clean air. And our forests are a really important piece of ensuring that we have clean air to breathe. 70% of our land cover in northwestern Connecticut is forested, which is really remarkable. And these trees are helping to filter out pollutants and produce oxygen for us to breathe. What's also interesting is that Connecticut has the highest amount of urban tree cover in any state in the US, and it's at about 62%. And so much of our state really is forested, which is really great for air quality and many other resources. I feel like forests sort of encompass all of these, a lot of these categories of why it's so important to think about conserving land. I think what's interesting to point out here, and Sarah will probably dive into a little bit more in the section around equity, is that while we have a really high amount of urban tree cover, there's still a lot of work that can be done around how equitable those trees are and where they're located within cities. Amanda, next slide. So lastly, for me, is to really think about wildlife habitat and biodiversity. So the map on the left-hand side of the screen is showing Northwest Connecticut within this regional context. So the green on the back, sort of in the background of the map, are core forests, which are over 250 acres in size. And so these are large, intact, forested ecosystems that are really critical for many of these different ecosystem services or resource values that we think of. And they're also part of what we map out as the Follow the Forest initiative, that we are part of this large regional vision that extends from the Southern Hudson Valley all the way to Canada. We are also part of and sit within the heart of the Berkshire wildlife linkage, which was identified as a really critical region by the Nature Conservancy and the Staying Connected initiative due to the high amount of biodiversity within our region and these large intact forests. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to talk a little bit more.
Thanks, Julia. Sarah Pellegrino, I'm land protection staff for the Nature Conservancy in Connecticut, and I'd like to also echo Julia's sentiments about including us in this opportunity. So thank you. So as Julia mentioned, the Berkshire Wildlife Linkage is a critical corridor of the Appalachian Mountains and includes the most intact forest ecosystems in southern New England and some of its highest carbon stocks. This is a focal area for the Nature Conservancy and is truly regionally significant, not just among the towns it covers within Connecticut, but also as a connection from New York to Massachusetts, and then zooming out further, connecting the central Appalachians with the northern Appalachians. Next slide, please. So climate resilience is the capacity to maintain species diversity and ecological function as the climate changes. The high ecological integrity of Northwest Connecticut makes it one of the most important places to focus for climate resilience. This map here shows connectivity and climate flows. And in this case, climate flow refers to the movement of population of species in responses to changes in climate. This analysis highlights connections that are important for this population movement. And on this map, blue is representative of high or above average flow. You can see here where those areas are within and beyond Connecticut. This data is part of TNC's Resilient and Connected Network. These are lands across North America where scientists have identified areas best positioned to withstand climate change and the linkages between those areas. So mapping out these habitats and the natural pathways among them show where plants and animals have the best chances to find new places to call home. Next slide, please. So conserved land can provide many economic benefits, which we'll speak to on the next couple of slides. With this topic, you'll often hear the phrase, cows don't go to school. I'm sure that's true in most places. And that's because one of the most significant economic benefits of conserving land is reducing municipal costs of building and maintaining infrastructure to accommodate new development, such as roads, utilities, and public services like schools and emergency services. Properties located near conserved areas and greenways often have increased value due to the proximity to natural areas and recreational opportunities. And this can generate revenue for local governments through increased property tax and support for local businesses. Restoration is also an important part of conservation work, and the report talks about those opportunities as well. And that creates job opportunities, especially for youth excited to start a career in conservation work. And I would like to actually point out, and Aaron, when you have a moment, you can drop this into the chat. When I was looking for other resources for the economic benefits of conservation, there are great resources in the report. There's also a really nice write-up on the CLCC website with links to all sorts of great studies and data to help support this argument. Next slide, please. So this report emphasizes that agriculture, access to food, and preventing the conversion of agricultural lands to development is really important for this region. Connecticut ranks 7th in the nation for risk of losing our farmland to development. And in Litchfield County, there's more than 1,200 farms, which cover over 90,000 acres of land. These farms not only produce food for the region, but are also a critical part of the economic sustainability and keeps dollars local. Local food production also reduces emissions from transportation. The report also suggests that there are opportunities to sustainably grow forestry production, given the heavy forest cover of the region, which also provides income to landowners and associated businesses. So ecosystem services are the benefits people receive from nature, and they have real economic value. Julia already spoke to how nature helps clean our air and clean our water. Another example mentioned in the report is how forests and other ecosystems absorb and store carbon from the atmosphere, helping to mitigate the impacts of climate change. The report also highlights agricultural support through pollination, pest control, and soil health. Next slide, please. So tourism and outdoor recreation are a critical part of Northwest Connecticut's economy. Conserving natural areas can provide opportunities for ecotourism and outdoor recreation, generating revenue for local businesses. In Connecticut, this generates $3.9 billion annually and accounts for more than 44,000 jobs. Recent studies have also shown there are numerous physical and mental health benefits from having access to the outdoors and the ability to exercise and recreate. These benefits are substantial and highlight the importance of preserving natural areas for the health and well-being of residents. And continuing to preserve areas that support outdoor recreation, especially for multiple diverse uses, and that increase access for communities that have historically been underserved is critical. And that's a segue to our next slide. The next few talk about equity and conservation. And equity and conservation is really an ongoing process of recognizing that all people don't benefit equally from land conservation, and then working authentically to correct that imbalance. Environmental justice policy uses census data to map where vulnerable populations coincide with environmental hazards. And I think most people are very familiar with the impacts of pollution as being one of the most places this is evident, but it's also representative of lack of access to green spaces and recreation opportunities. Environmental justice block groups and distressed municipalities can also represent areas heavily impacted by the lack of affordable housing and declining rates of job creation. Next slide. The report also speaks to tribal land and sovereignty and offers suggestions for better engagement and collaboration with those communities. But overall, today, to really responsibly engage in conservation work, you must consider equity in your decision-making, programming, and land management. Thank you.
Hi again, everybody. So I'm Kathy Sepiel, Land Protection Manager for Save the Sound. And I'm just going to kind of try and pull all of this information together for you as the report does. So I think what's a really helpful framework that's suggested by this report about land conservation in Northwest Connecticut, and by extension, land conservation in other parts of the state or even the country, is to think about this framework that you've heard a little bit about already, which is 3 strategic implications to keep in mind as you're trying to make a strategic plan for land conservation in your own region. And so you've heard from Julia and Sarah about the ecological, economic, and equitable implications in land conservation. So again, to use Northwest Connecticut as an example, when we're looking at these three implications, the report found that there were some large-scale patterns that emerged for the region. And they appear in the implications summary at the end of the report, but I'll just really briefly go through those now so you can see how this framework of ecological, economic, and equitable implications was applied in the report to Northwest Connecticut. Next slide, please. So first of all, in the area of economics, the report concluded that a focus on farmland retention in areas with prime agricultural soils and existing farmland at risk of conversion into sprawling development would be two logical areas in which to focus land conservation attention in Northwest Connecticut in terms of that economic piece of the framework. Next slide. And then we have the ecological focus. And so the report concluded that a focus on conserving land in ecologically important areas, again, in Northwest Connecticut, would include the Berkshire wildlife linkage through the Appalachian Mountains in Northwest Connecticut. So again, using this framework helps you to think about what are the specific areas in your region that would fit under each of these implications and help you make some decisions about where to focus your attention. Next slide. And of course, the third one then is equity. And the report discusses a focus on green space restoration and improved access within state designated environmental justice communities, where residents living under the federal poverty level are exposed to environmental hazards and live near impaired rivers. Next slide. So one way to think about these three strategic implications is to think about where they might overlap. So maybe you actually have some land conservation project in your region that actually is an overlap of those three areas, the ecological, the economic, and the equity implications. Or maybe you can think about a project where there's an overlap between two of those areas. But also the report emphasizes that you don't necessarily have to have an overlap in order to choose a conservation project. So as it says in this summary at the end, you may prioritize a single consideration that remains highly important and yields other benefits. So that's one way of thinking about land protection, is to use this three-part framework. And we talked a little bit earlier about 30 by 30, and I just want to emphasize, as the report does, that acquiring a particular percentage of land for protection is only one piece of a larger conservation strategy. And Amanda also pointed out earlier that 30 by 30 is not the end goal. So it's one piece of a larger strategy. And the goal really is to conserve land strategically. Again, if you're going to use this report, this framework can be really helpful for making those determinations, thinking in your region about where the conservation opportunities are, where the pressures are, and then how you can put together a thoughtful land conservation strategy for your region. And next slide. So I'll just, to shift to Save the Sound for just a moment, because sometimes people say to us, what is Save the Sound doing up in Northwest Connecticut, so far from the coastline? And the answer is that it's connected to this idea about thinking more strategically and holistically about land conservation. So Save the Sound's mission is, to simplify it, is to protect and improve the land, air, and water in the Long Island Sound region. And of course, that includes land protection for all the reasons that you've just heard. So when we think about protecting and saving the Sound, we think about the entire watershed. And you heard Julia talk earlier about watersheds and their importance as well. So I think it's interesting for people just to see the green shaded area on this map is the entire Long Island Sound watershed. Save the Sound does a lot of work right now in Connecticut. And you can see there's that little piece of Westchester County and Queens, and then the North Shore of Long Island. So that's right now where our work is focused. But you can see that the watershed actually extends all the way up through Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, into Canada. And it also captures a couple little more pieces in New York State. And so just to reemphasize what Julia was saying earlier about watersheds, having an awareness of the watersheds in your own region is also a really important component of a land conservation strategy.
So I'm joining you again to talk a little bit about how your organization might use this report. And Kathy touched on it. One of the ways that is easiest to apply the report is when you're thinking about strategic conservation planning as a land trust, or for municipalities, or other government agencies, to think about these concepts that are encapsulated in the report is really, really helpful. And I wanted to just take a minute to note that putting this information and these practices into play and increasing the pace of conservation is really working. Since some of the stats that I noted earlier, land trust partners throughout our region have secured many other conservation projects. It's been at least 20 different transactions, and that's to protect just under 3,000 acres just since 2021. And it's also really interesting to note that these principles of both ecological importance, but also economic and equity considerations have been demonstrated in these new projects by the land trust working in our region. About a quarter of the acres that are included in this count are in environmental justice communities, and there are represented in here about 12 different new opportunities for the public to access preserved land, and that is also incorporated in the 700 acres or so in environmental justice communities in the region. And so that's really taking all of these different aspects, and the Venn diagram of everything that Kathy's slide showed is really coming together, and we're really looking forward to being able to use this report to help continue to make that case. And I think Amy's going to join us now to talk about that.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for your patience
Sorry.
there. Can you see me? All set? So my slide is, can you see me? Yeah, there we go. So again, building off of Amanda's comments about how you may use this report. As you know, CLCC assists land trusts and communities in all facets of their work. And our mission is to elevate and strengthen land conservation across the state. And so we're super excited about this project, not only because of its regional focus in the very natural resource rich Northwest Connecticut, but also because of its value to statewide conservation, especially when we look at the why behind making the case for conservation. So how can you use it? Of course, as Amanda just described, for strategic conservation planning in your own community and your own region. We hope that this will spur conversations across town lines so that you can be looking at the bigger picture and thinking more collaboratively about conservation impact. But you can also use the report itself, but so many of the details that are provided in the report for outreach to your own land trust members, educating municipal leaders. Just this week, I spoke with an individual who is a resident of a town in the lower Connecticut region. And he was asking me about arguments to be made for making the case for funding at the local level for conservation. And I said, you know, come to this meeting tomorrow night. This report is rich with information that you can use no matter where you live in Connecticut. And so to that end, at the state level, of course, CLCC and our partners will use this information to support advocacy efforts, prioritizing land conservation programs and funding, but also as well as emphasizing the need for collaboration when looking at how we can support healthy, sustainable communities. And certainly the three focus areas of economic, ecological equity are critically important now. There's so much dialogue at the state level about how we should be looking more holistically at land and how that impacts the decisions that are being made both at the state, local level and the federal level as well. And then finally, you can, of course, use this information to support your grant applications and your fundraising. I did note a couple of questions in the chat. Thank you, Connie and Fred, for putting those in there. And Fred, you had asked the question about, is there any dedicated funding for 30 by 30 besides OSWA, which is the Open Space and Watershed Land Acquisition Grant Program? And I would say at the state level right now, I don't know of any dedicated grant program to achieve 30 by 30. But by applying to OSWA and any other grant programs to conserve land, you are moving in that direction anyway. And I think what really stood out to me about the presentation tonight, especially with the intersection of the economic, the ecological, and the equity focus areas, is how that fits so well into the OSWA grant application. And those of you that have applied to that program know that that DEEP has increased the questions and the scoring around areas beyond purely natural resource values. So this information is super helpful. We're really excited to be able to use it in those ways and encourage all the land trusts across the state to take a better look at the report and use it to their advantage. So thank you. Amanda, I'll turn it back over to you.
I think that we are ready to answer any questions from the group.
So there is one question here besides Fred's, and Fred, I hope that I answered your question at least enough for tonight. And of course, we can continue to look to see if at the federal level, where there's so much funding coming down the pike, how 30 by 30 fits in specifically in any of those grants. But the question that Connie asked was, can you speak to how the impacts of climate change factor into prioritization of conservation from the lenses of the three areas of economic, ecological, and equity? So I'll throw that out there to our panel. Anybody want to jump in?
Say, leave it to Connie for the hard-hitting question. Well, I can partially start, and then hopefully someone will support me. Connie, you know, at the Nature Conservancy, we're really hoping that making our resilient and connected network data available will help inform land trusts in towns and anyone really looking to prioritize conservation within their areas. Is designed to be added information for those who are looking to consider resilience in their planning. And it has lots of different ways you can view the data in your town based on different criteria to help with that prioritization, so that you are able to take resilience, at least terrestrial resilience. I should clarify that the data currently is just terrestrial resilience, although freshwater resilience is coming out next, to see where those places are in your town, and ideally even beyond the borders of your town, so that we really are looking at larger regional areas as part of our planning.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just jump in quickly and say that, well, it's a really complicated question. It's like a three-layered question. But I think that those three areas, and actually somebody here has suggested a fourth as well, these areas, economic, ecological, and equity, could of course be applied to other situations as well. So, I mean, when you talk about climate change, that's a term that obviously encompasses land conservation and water quality, all kinds of areas that we're concerned about. So I don't know whether you're asking about the intersection of climate change and land conservation specifically, but I can say that, you know, trees have a really important impact on climate. And I'm sure that all of you know that. I don't really have to tell this group that, but, you know, if you think, for example, about the cooling effects of trees, and the benefit that they have, for example, in the urban forest canopy, they're going to help to cool not only the area when you're standing underneath the shade of a tree, but the entire area around a little urban forest is cooled by the presence of those trees. And so, you know, there's an economic benefit to an urban neighborhood to having that little urban forest there. There's obviously an ecological benefit to having a little wildlife habitat, for example, and all of the other benefits that trees bring in terms of, for example, filtering out pollutants in stormwater. And of course, there's an equity issue. Someone mentioned earlier the fact that when you look at the map, and Connecticut has, I didn't actually know this before, the largest amount of urban trees. That's great, but there's an equity issue in where they're actually located. I think Julia said that before. So, you know, if you take these three frames and put them around any issue, climate change, land conservation, urban forest, whatever, I think it's a great tool to help you measure, you know, where there are opportunities to act.
Thank you, Kathy. And there were, I'm going to go back here to the chat, and I'm going to scoot down to Billy Gridley's comments and questions. And I would love to kick a response to that about affordable housing, the intersection of affordable housing and land conservation. And at CLCC, we held a summit last winter on that topic, and it was well attended. It was very well attended, and through some of our other programming, our community conservation programming, we're having these conversations around the intersection of land conservation and affordable housing across the state. And I would say that, you know, land trusts are very interested in it, and I think we are definitely seeing a shift in how land trusts are looking at land. It's something more difficult to do retrospectively, but prospectively, when you're doing your conservation planning and looking at parcels through a broader lens of not just conserving the land for its natural resources value, its farmland values, but also for its potential to provide some housing. And we're really excited because there are models emerging throughout the state. There's one that we call the Salem model, and it actually was precipitated by conversations through some of our community conservation dialogues. And in that case, we had an individual purchase a piece of land that went on the market. It was at risk of being developed. Purchase that parcel to buy it, protect it, and then sell it. And it is being sold for three purposes: for land conservation to the local land trust. This is the Salem Land Trust, to the Southeast Connecticut Community Land Trust for both affordable housing and farmland access. So that is a great model, and it is one, again, that we think we will be seeing more of, and we'll certainly be hoping to incentivize. Any other questions? You are so welcome.
I can just add to the affordable housing conversation. I just wanted to jump in to say that one of the things that we're doing at NCLC on that issue is, as many of land trusts on the call, I'm sure, also do, we have a checklist that we go through every time a potential land project comes up. And one of the things is, it sounds like a very minor thing, but one of the things we've done is we've added, is this property a good candidate for partnership or some aspect of affordable housing as part of what we look at when we're looking at potential projects. So that's one small thing that we're doing, because sometimes we as a land trust may be approached by a landowner who's interested in preserving a piece of property that's not really a great candidate for perpetual conservation, but could be a good candidate for affordable housing. And so we're trying to make sure that we're having an open partnership and dialogue with our partners on the affordable housing in those organizations. And we also are currently working on a couple of projects, one that's in direct partnership with an affordable housing organization that we're really excited about. It will hopefully, if and when we achieve the project, it will end up as a combination of adding direct access for an affordable housing development to existing and new trails systems, as well as being able to provide some revenue for the affordable housing organization to allow them to do more of their work elsewhere.
Thanks, Amanda. And I will just say that, you know, that type of prioritizing and that looking at land through a broader lens is, again, something we're emphasizing, and we are seeing land trust respond to that. So I think this is an issue that we're going to be looking at more positively as we move along. Let me see here. It looks like, I hope I didn't miss anybody above Rebecca Dahl, but she says the report focuses on Northwest Connecticut, but it has been noted that all of Connecticut makes up the watershed that impacts the sound. As you all have touched on, there are several factors, biodiversity, equity, economy, et cetera, to consider when planning conservation priorities throughout the state. What avenues do you suggest or would you like to see for prioritizing finite state funding towards conserving open space? Anybody want to take a stab at that? I guess I'm trying to understand the question a little bit. That's why I'm pausing myself for prioritizing finite state funding towards conserving open space. And I always use as my point of reference the open space grant program, because it is the main source of the OSWA grant program. That is the main source of funding that our land trusts and towns and water companies use to acquire land. And I think that rather than, you know, I think right now that program is functioning well. It is it's prioritizing the areas of concern that need to be addressed, but it's also looking a little more broadly at some of these other issues that the speakers tonight have emphasized that talk to the intersection of not only ecological priorities, but also economic and equitable. So, you know, I think we have a good program here in Connecticut. Do we want to see more funding dedicated to it and maybe expand it to other areas? Absolutely, we always do. And I think that looking at our land more holistically to start to account for those other focus areas will likely help in that way. Anybody else want to jump in, try and answer that question? Otherwise, I will move on here. Say a lot of really nice comments here. Any other questions? You can raise your hand if you don't want to put it in the chat. We have another question here. What if there was a future IRA like Inflation Recovery Act, which really was carbon transition, but for nature? Would we be ready to absorb the money? I have some thoughts about absorbing the money, but anybody else want to jump in?
I don't think we ever have problem absorbing the money.
Yeah, that's why I hate to use the word finite. You know, we need to continue to advocate for funding. And so I would say, Billy, though, to address your question, you know, I think that when we're looking at money flowing from the federal government to the state, and specifically to DEEP, and how DEEP is being asked to take that money and use it and make sure we leverage every bit of it. DEEP needs to be supported. DEEP needs staff. They need to be able to administer these programs efficiently. So just as we advocate at the state level for land conservation funding and the programs that provide that funding, we're also advocating very strongly that DEEP have the resources that agency needs in order to not only undertake its current responsibilities, but be able to expand upon those responsibilities, especially at this time when we have a lot of federal money flowing. So we need to support DEEP. We need to make sure that that agency is supported and has the staff it needs to do its job.
Right, because so many of those funding sources require that they go through the state agencies.
And the one other thing I would mention about those funding sources is also if there is a match requirement, not just from the state, but if it flows down to the municipalities, municipalities need their own sources of revenue as well to make sure that they can match the grants that are now available. And so looking at municipal funding options, giving them the right to establish their own programming, their own funding sources through various fees and other other programs is something that's important as well. So municipalities need that support. They can't be expected to spend the money when they don't have the resources to put the match in as well. Aaron, you're on and not muted, so I assume you want to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I spend a lot of time thinking about capacity building for land trusts, and I think land trusts themselves also need to start thinking about their capacity to handle that type of funding. We're at CLCC getting a taste for what's involved with federal grants and state grants, and it's a lot. And I'm sure there are all volunteer land trusts that could pull it off, but it's a lot of work and it's going to take a lot of capacity. So thinking about potentially shared resources and building that capacity so that land trusts are positioned to take advantage of the current funding through IRA or other future funding opportunities that make their way down to these organizations is going to be critical.
And one other point about IRA, I would say, with the ARPA funds that had come out, municipalities were given a lot of flexibility to use them. I know that program is over, but with these federal funding sources, as they go to municipalities, I do encourage land trusts to work very collaboratively with their town and to come up with ideas that can be used, that money can be used for, that can flow directly to the land trust or in partnership with the land trust. I think that these federal opportunities are really a terrific time to be looking at partnerships, whether they be between land trusts and towns, within regions, COGS. This is a great time to be really leveraging that federal money by seeking out partnerships.
May I join? Amy, this is John Olin.
Hi, John.
Yes, I just wanted to say exactly, you're right. And I wanted to also add community engagement as part of the municipal contribution, which is essential for as part of a grant application in many cases. Our experience in East Haddam with the Nature Conservancy holding a workshop on building community resilience was very successful, really because of the amount of interest there was in the town. And I think TNC responded to that and has helped us really realize some of our goals because of that. So again, I want to emphasize the importance of community engagement. Bringing leaders, I'm talking about many aspects, whether it's land trusts, of course, but in municipal departments, emergency management, public works, and on, various leaders in the community in general, business owners, farmers, etc. And it's very exciting and gives the momentum to move forward on a project when there is buy-in, so to speak, and when there's ownership of projects.
Thank you, John, for those terrific comments. Anybody else want to jump in? You could raise your hand. That should pop up on our screen. Got 5 minutes left. I don't know if any of our panelists would like to just have some closing remarks and points of emphasis. Again, I'm not seeing any other questions, but I do want to say on behalf of all of us that we really appreciate your all being here and taking advantage of this opportunity to learn about this terrific report. I also want to thank NCLC and Save the Sound for including CLCC and giving us an opportunity to be a part of this so that we could take advantage of this tremendous effort and bring it to the state level and hopefully see its all of this useful information be spread statewide.
I'll just drop the, I was just going to say, I'll just drop the link to the report again in the chat for anybody who missed it way up there so that you can access it online since the hard copies are running out.
Don't hesitate to let me know if you're interested in one, and I'll just add that I appreciate John's comments as well, and I really hope that this report can be helpful in in figuring out ways to communicate with municipal leaders, with all of the agencies within your own municipality and community to talk about some of these issues, because when it's very helpful to build some buy-in about why conservation in the first place. And then when it comes to making a case for an individual project, once you've already got them on board with conservation funding or figuring out strategies for executing on a particular project is that much easier when you've already got partners on your side.
Any other comments, last comments from our tremendous speakers here tonight?
I mean, I'll just say it's been a pleasure to work with everybody on this report as well and on this webinar. I saw somebody made a comment about how nice it is to see all these organizations working together. We love it too. We love to work together because everybody brings their own expertise to the table and we can learn from each other and support each other. And I think this report is a really terrific, was a really terrific opportunity for us to do that.
And if you haven't read it, I encourage you to do that. And I'm telling you, again, just in the conversations that I've had this week with a number of individuals and a number of land trusts, it's really fun to be able to point them to this report and say, hey, you know what? If you go to that section, you'll find exactly the information that you're looking for that you can then present to the town individual that asked that question. So take advantage of it. It's terrific. All right. Well, it is 6:58. We could end a little early. I'll give it a going once, going twice for any last questions. Otherwise, you can all go and enjoy the rest of your evening as well. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for coming and great job, panelists.